So I don't know if we have any chiropractors with us this morning, but the first theme today is a stiff neck. The second one is going to be an examination of conscience. And then the final one is going to be feeling worthless. So first, a stiff neck. You know, in the first reading, God speaks to Moses and he talks to him about a problem, that this is a stiff-necked people. And it's a really important image because a stiff neck can't move up or down or left or right. And so, of course, someone who is stiff-necked doesn't look up to the Lord for direction and also doesn't ask God for help. A stiff-necked person doesn't look to the left or to the right to see the people around them and, more importantly, to see the effect that they have on the people around them. And a stiff-necked person also doesn't bow their head in worship and prayer. And so to be a stiff-necked person is spiritually dangerous because it isolates us. It means that we think we can do it all by ourselves. We think that somehow we're going to be able to, through the work of our hands, manage all of life's issues. And that's the image of the molten calf. You know, the people of Israel had just been liberated from slavery. They were in the desert. They had seen God manifest his power and glory to them on Mount Horeb, and yet they immediately go back to the worship of a false god. They create, through their own hands, something that they hold up as higher than God himself. That's what idolatry is. And idolatry takes 1,000 different forms, and that's why an examination of conscience is so important. We do an examination of conscience to understand what is working inside of us. And that's what St. Paul does in the second reading. St. Paul is very open about his faults. He says, I was a blasphemer, I was a persecutor of the church, I was arrogant. And then he goes on and he describes himself as a sinner. And so doing an examination of conscience is really important for us because it helps us to tune up our conscience. And if you want to find some good examinations of conscience, just go on Google. Uncle Google knows everything. And so look for an examination of conscience. One of the first things that'll pull up is the U.S. bishops, and they have a whole series of examination of conscience. There's one for a single person. There's one for a married person. There's one that just follows through the 10 Commandments. There's a whole variety of them. Choose whichever one you like, whichever one applies. But go through it sometime this week and look at a real examination of conscience, because it's important for us to be in touch with our own faults. It's important for us to know where we have missed the mark, where we are turning away from true worship of God and turning towards ourselves. Now, one of the dangers of doing that, of course, is when we do an examination of conscience, we are confronted with guilt. Now, I know sometimes we make jokes about Catholic guilt, but there's a difference between guilt and shame. Shame is the voice of the devil. Shame is what Adam and Eve heard after the first sin. That's why they hid themselves from God, because they were ashamed. The voice of shame says to us, you are bad. You are worthless. That's shame. Guilt says, you did something wrong. You made a mistake. You need to fix this. That's guilt. Guilt is what draws us back to the Lord. Shame is what pushes us away. And so the voice of shame is never the voice of God. And that's why in the gospel today, Jesus chooses 3 worthless things. Because he starts off and he says, who among you, having 100 sheep and losing one, wouldn't leave the 99 behind and go look for the one? Well, of course, everybody in the crowd is like, I wouldn't do that. How many of us would be happy right now if we'd only had a 1% loss in the stock market? We'd be feeling pretty lucky, right? So a 1% loss is not something that's going to change my life. And I'm certainly not going to risk 99 sheep in order to go after one. Or he goes on a little further and he says, there was a woman who had coins and she lost a penny. How many of you would spend any time going through your house looking for a penny? Of course not. A penny is worthless. It's not worth my time. and so I wouldn't look for a penny. Or there was a father who had a worthless son. He basically said to his dad, "Dad, I don't have time to wait for you to die. I'd like my inheritance now." And amazingly, his dad gave it to him. And then he walked away and wasted it. He was useless. He was worthless. And so Jesus uses 3 worthless things to show us how important we are to God. That our God is a God who even looks for a penny. That our God is a God who goes after the one, not the 99. That our God looks at that worthless son and sees a son. That's the God we believe in. Now, why is that important? Well, it's important because we're supposed to have the heart of the Father. We're supposed to have the kind of heart that looks for a penny, the kind of heart that goes after the one, the kind of heart that doesn't see a useless son or a worthless son, but sees a son. Now, to make it personal, I want you to imagine that right now a busload of people showed up and they wanted to have a seat here in church. And one of the ushers came down the aisle and asked you to move over. It's horrific, isn't it? But that's just a small step in cultivating an environment of hospitality, of evangelization. You know, it's not that our church is empty. We have a lot of people who come and worship here, but it's not enough. And I talked to the other priests, so I'm not talking out of school. We will add as many masses as we need to add in order to invite and welcome and receive anyone who is feeling lost, anyone who feels worthless, anyone who thinks they don't have value, because that's who we are. That's our mission, to evangelize, to show the heart of the Father to the world around us. And so today, as we gather together, I invite you, one, just to take some time this week, do that examination of conscience, to see where God is inviting you to come to the Father. Because even that little tug on our heart, that tug where we feel, I made a mistake, I did something wrong, I need to fix this. Just that desire itself is God at work in us, seeking us out. Because God doesn't passively wait around for us, He looks for us, He finds us, and He puts us on His shoulders, and He brings us safely home.